Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Co-Host, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. This doesn't come out of nowhere, right? This goes back hundreds of years, if not longer. And you talk about the Bilderbergs, and people don't know about the Bilderbergs. Now, it used to be some crazy thing that Alex Jones made up. But now, thanks to the reporting of people like you, people like the Gray Zone, we all know it's real. Now, can you just tell people what the Bilderbergs are? And even though influential news people have been invited to meetings of the Bilderbergs, they would never report on it, which is amazing. So could you just go ahead and take it wherever you want? And how would you explain it to a layperson, a regular person who doesn't know anything about the Bilderbergs, what they are, how they started, and how they actually control everything?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good question. And so, yes, in Reportage, I have an essay specifically on why we must oppose Bilderberg, which I think my regular audience and people who listen to me will probably understand by now, but you're right. There's a lot of people who have never heard of Bilderberg, have no idea what it is. So let's just imagine if you had, I don't know, 100 of the top sports athletes or movie stars or whatever gathering in an enclave in LA there for, a few days every year. You better believe every paparazzi in existence would be swarming over that place. They'd be reporting on it breathlessly. Oh my God, what are they talking about in there? Oh my God, the movie moguls are going to make some incredible new Marvel movie, whatever. People try to understand about that. They'll report on it. But suddenly when you have, say, 150 corporate chieftains, captains of industry, financiers and bankers, sitting members of parliament, sitting members of Congress, cabinet members, royalty, and Rockefellers and Kissingers back when they were alive, Peter Thiel and Alex Karp and people like that. Now that we've switched into the 21st century, suddenly whatever, crickets, who cares, whatever, move on. It's crazy that you're even interested in that. And as crazy as that is, 20 years ago it literally was. They told you it was a conspiracy theory that Bilderberg even existed. That to me is just mind-blowing. So yes, for people who don't know, every year since 1954, with the exception of the scamdemic, I think they canceled it for a year or two. But basically every year since 1954, these incredibly important 150, 200 of the most important people in the world have been meeting entirely in secret in some 4-star resort near some national capital, either in Europe or North America. Once a year for three days, and they get together and they discuss, well, what do they discuss? Thankfully, we do have some insight into this, and I've got the links from the notes here in case, as you say, people might actually be interested in it. You can go and read some of the meeting minutes, and even some audio has leaked out of some of these meetings, but they are completely, totally off limits to press to anyone, unless, except for those reporters who actually go there and actually participate in Bilderberg. But they have that Chatham House rule where you can go there and you can listen and you can even say some of the things that were talked about there, but you cannot identify who said what or any specifics. That's the rule that they operate under. Let me just, it comes even under a bigger umbrella, if that's possible. You say on page 32, in other words, there is a clandestine network of influential figures, the Roundtable groups referred to by Quigley, who cooperate with both the left and the right sides of the traditional political spectrum to carry out their own self-serving agenda. In this way, they rig the system so that voters can never affect fundamental change. And that's what's actually happening at the Bilderberg meeting. Now people are more familiar with the WEF and Davos and things like those are similar things, and that is there to make sure that your vote doesn't matter. I think Mark Twain said if voting made a difference, they'd make it illegal, right? I think it's attributed to Emma Goldman.
Okay,
I don't know
maybe
if
you're right.
Those attributions are right. But anyway, yeah, you're right. And Look, I don't think Bilderberg is the center of global power and is the conspiracy, but it is certainly one of the arms through which this operates. And we can get that from a number of perspectives. For example, Willy Claes, who was the NATO Secretary General once upon a time and attended Bilderberg twice, admitted in a radio interview that essentially meetings take place, they discuss certain topics, and then every individual member of Bilderberg is expected to go back and implement whatever decisions are made in their own way. He said that in a radio interview. So we know that this does happen. And we know, for example, that the euro was talked about, discussed, and hashed out at Bilderberg before it was ever actually put into reality. And again, we have that from Etienne d'Avignon himself. So these people have talked about it at times and sort of given a little peek under the kimono, but we're not supposed to care about that at our level, I guess. Just keep eating nachos and watching Super Bowl or something.
So you talk about like the roundtable groups, right? Which is what Quigley had referred to. And let me just read this part. The actual aim of these kind of networks, right, of Bilderbergs, the WEF, and so on. She says the powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. We're living in this right now, by the way. The system was to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent private meetings and conferences. The apex of the system was to be the Bank for International Settlements, something most people have never heard of. In Basel, Switzerland, a private bank owned by and controlled by the world's central banks, which were themselves private corporations. So now the bigger picture is, and we're actually living in this. So I try to tell people, well, Jimmy, are these secret meetings where people get together to do the bidding of the oligarchs? And I'm like, no. One of those meetings would be called a session of Congress. When they get together, you think they're really doing the bidding of workers and the elderly and the sick and the poor? They're doing the biddings of the oligarchs, these people, the people on these roundtables, the Bilderbergs, the people at the WEF, the handful of millionaires and billionaires that actually run everything in the world, and it's run for them. And there was a study by Princeton done about 10 years ago now that proved that your vote doesn't matter, that there is no correlation between what the average voter wants to see in legislation and what actually ends up in legislation. But there is a direct correlation between the upper 10% in the country of what they want to see, and if they want to see it, it ends up in legislation. And so this is what people, and it's a big game, this left-right game, and this whole world domination. If you could just talk a little bit about, you mentioned it earlier about the euro, how they got together, and their dream was the European Union, right? So talk a little bit about. Well, let me just play this video, and then you can respond to it. Here's a guy who's going to let you know that the European Union is basically a scam.
Here's one for you. The EU is the world's biggest scam, and its leaders are nothing but flunky politicians running cover for each other. You ever notice how scandal-ridden politicians never actually fall? Instead of getting fired, persecuted, or held accountable, they magically land cushy jobs in the EU. Take Ursula von der Leyen. She was Germany's Minister of Defense, a total disaster. Her ministry handed out millions in shady contracts to friends and ex-colleagues in a scandal so bad it should have ended her career. Fraud, mismanagement, backroom deals, the works. And what happened? She got promoted, not fired. Not investigated, promoted to president of the European Commission, one of the most powerful positions in Europe. That's the EU's real purpose, protecting its own. This is why the EU is a joke. It's a dumping ground for politicians who should be in court, not in power. They don't answer to voters, they answer to each other. And now this same fraud is pushing Europe into war. You think someone who was pulling dirty defense contracts in Germany suddenly got honest in Brussels? If she was handing out shady deals then, what the hell do you think she's doing now? This is why Hungary, Slovakia, and others aren't playing along. They see through the scam. They're not about to send their soldiers to die for von der Leyen's career, for Brussels' power grab, or for the war machine cashing in on billions. This isn't just another corruption scandal. This isn't about stolen tax money. This is about setting up Europeans to kill and die in a war they didn't sign up for. And who benefits? Not the average European struggling with inflation, not the people crushed by energy prices, not the Ukrainians thrown into the grinder. The only winners are the unelected frauds in Brussels and the war profiteers counting their money. It's a total scam. It's always been a scam, and the longer people refuse to see it, the more lives will be destroyed.
Now, you explained very clearly in this book, which is a wonderful book. I can't talk. I'll be recommending it to everyone and buying it for anybody who still reads books. But you lay out in clear detail how the European Union was conceived and then implemented. In fact, there was a handful of countries in Europe didn't want to go along with them, Ireland being one of them. And when they voted it down, they made them keep. Go ahead. You talk about how it got started.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a crazy story, and I wish more people knew about it. So, yes, to put it on the record, from 1955, the second ever Bilderberg conference, we have the meeting minutes from that conference now. They are available online, and they talk specifically at the second ever Bilderberg conference about arriving in the shortest possible time at the highest degree of integration, beginning with a common European market. They were aiming at trying to form a European Union. 2 years later, 1957, they signed the Treaty of Rome, which established the European Economic Community. And they sort of passed it off like, oh, this is just kind of a little trade agreement. It's just a little, it's not important, guys. Don't worry about it. But then fast forward 50 years to 2007, and they're like, hey, it's the 50th anniversary of the European Union. Because do you remember that Treaty of Rome thing? Yeah, that was the start of the European Union. We just didn't tell you guys about it. And who signed the Treaty of Rome? Oh, like Bilderberg members like Paul Henry Spaak. So, they had their snoot all in that from the very beginning. And it is, as that speaker there was talking about, is completely an undemocratic, completely ridiculous institution in so many ways. And the prime example of that was in the early 2000s. They were trying to pass this European constitution. They wanted a constitution for the EU. But the problem was a constitutional document that countries were going to sign up to, that gave a lot of countries, just by the nature of their system, it mandated that they have referendum. And actually gave the people a say in it. So, for example, I believe the Netherlands and France, there were a number of countries that were voting it down. It wasn't going to get passed. So they're like, okay, we're not going to do this constitution thing. We're going to have the Lisbon Treaty. It's basically the Constitution in all but name.
A treaty. They called it a treaty instead of a constitution.
Yeah, exactly. And that bypassed every single national government except Ireland. Ireland was the one that had in their in their own Irish constitution, no, we still get to vote. We still get a referendum. So they had to give the Irish people a say. And the first vote on the Lisbon Treaty, the Irish people said no. So they said, okay, vote again. They just did it all over again.
Yes.
It's completely ridiculous. And then they rigged it 7 ways from Sunday. And finally, the Irish people said yes to the Lisbon Treaty. So that's how it came in. This is the kind of nonsense that they have been pulling for decades and decades and decades. And unfortunately, it flies under the radar for a lot of people. But once you start digging, scratching the surface, you start finding all this stuff. And it isn't crazy conspiracy realist James Corbett sitting here in Japan. Like, what does he know? As you say, Carol Quigley, I should just interject, just like reportage, not reportage. Carol Quigley is in fact a man. And not just any man.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Carol Quigley was a Georgetown professor who was a real deal, like big name historian, and who celebrated, lauded, big career, very important historian, who started writing about some of the inner workings of these roundtable groups and the Anglo-American establishment, Tragedy and Hope, books like that. Suddenly his publisher was destroying the prints of these books and trying to essentially suppress it. He had to give like secretive interviews that did survive, and you can listen to them online, where he's talking about, oh, they're trying to suppress my books and everything. But that's the same Carol Quigley that Bill Clinton name-checked in his acceptance speech for the DNC nomination back in '92. He said Carroll Quigley was the man who provided me the vision, blah, blah, blah. So there you go. That's the type of people who are talking about this. If anybody is listening, wake up.
So you're in your book, you're not kidding when you say that they had plans to form a world system of financial control. And we are living in that now, correct?
More or less, and more by the day. For example, people might know Mark Carney about to take, or has actually taken over PM in Canada. He sat on the Financial Stability Board, which was part of this Bank for International Settlements that were writing the global banking rules in the wake of the 2008 financial collapse. Because suddenly there's this big financial crisis. What are we going to do about it? They have the G20 in London, which you might remember Gordon Brown, the PM of Britain at that time, said, we need a new world order to save the earth. And so, of course, the Bank for International Settlements goes in and starts rewriting global banking regulations. Mark Carney was sitting on the Financial Stability Board that was helping to do that and bringing in the bail-in legislation, not bail out, not bailing out the banks, bailing them in by taking the depositors' funds and using that to recapitalize banks if they go underwater. That's the kind of stuff that we're looking at. And those are the kinds of people, Mark Carney and others, connected in with organizations like this, World Economic Forum and Bilderberg and these types of groups.
And so the European Union, actually, that it exists, marked a victory for what we would call the globalists, right? The Bilderbergs. And you write in your book on page 40, they had achieved once they got the European Union, they had achieved their aim of continental hegemony. So that's what the European Union actually represents, is continental hegemony of the ruling elite. It's not a victory for the people of Europe, correct?
Oh, absolutely not. No. So people need to understand that the idea for global government isn't simply to have some, actual capital of the world in wherever, Brussels or wherever. No, the idea is to put regional governments in place that then cooperate with each other on the big level, but whatever, regional governments first. And that's the system. So exactly like, remember 1984, it was Eurasia and East Asia and Oceania. And as Winston Smith notes in 1984, the bombs are falling and they tell us it's Eurasia or East Asia or whoever. It may be our own government. Who knows? Just bombs fall and we're at war. That's the type of system for global government that we're moving towards. And that's why regionalization and creation of, for example, the European Union is so important. And here's the crazy thing. In one of the essays in this book, I go into the North American Union idea that was really being worked on in earnest in the early 2000s there with the Security and Prosperity Partnership and all of that kind of nonsense, this shared strategic perimeter. And at that time, hey, that was when I was cutting my teeth in this conspiracy realist space back a couple of decades ago. And I remember at that time, you would have all these people crying out against the North American Union, and we don't want this, we don't want the Amero, because they're going to replace the dollar with the Amero and all of this. People were protesting against it. But weirdly, fast forward to 2025, and suddenly Trump is talking about taking over, Canada, 51st state, Greenland, whatever, we'll keep adding it to America. And a lot of the same people who were protesting that are now suddenly on board with the idea of some formation of some sort of grander North American union. That's the kind of craziness that we're stepping into.
And, the book keeps making I want to go back to this point, is that, you say in the book that more people are waking up to this game being played by the globalists, right? By the international elite, the bankers, and the internet had a big pull. It helped wake you up, when you got your internet in your apartment, and it certainly is how I learn almost everything, and the game so people are starting to wake up. The people who are, the workers of the world are waking up to this game and how they're being divided. So that's why I have a lot of MAGA viewers on my show. They don't necessarily agree with everything that I say, but they appreciate that I'm honest and I don't see them as the enemy, and they don't see me as the enemy. They realize that we do share a common enemy, and the common enemy, as you refer to in your book, are the uppists or the international bankers and globalists that actually run things. And then you say, on page 44. In short, we the people are realizing that it is the upists, not each other, not your neighbor, who are our true political enemy. And the upists realize that we are realizing it too. So they're starting to realize that. And you say, if we could overturn the system overnight, we could overturn the system overnight if enough of us were aware of our true position as downists living in an upist system. So so you have hope, right? That people are waking up. Hey, have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris? I know I did. I recently saw a video he made, and I was shocked. He's in his 80s, and he's still kicking butt and working out and staying active. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, can work out longer, and even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by making one change. He says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing this one thing too, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger, her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. Chuck made a special video, which I watched. Explains everything. Make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/Jimmy or by clicking on the link below this video. It will change the way you think about your health. Once again, that's chuckdefense.com/Jimmy, and click on the link in the description below to watch the video. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old and yet has more energy than me. He discovered he could create dramatic change to his health simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Watch his method by clicking the link in the description box below, chuckdefense.com/Jimmy. Come see us on tour in Hartford, Connecticut, Syracuse, Atlantic City, Levittown, New York, Co-Host, New York, Providence, Rhode Island, Los Angeles, Bakersfield, San Jose, Toledo, Ohio, and Toronto, Ontario. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.